I thought I'd do something a little different today. I'm actually going without slides, without anything on the screen, because I actually wanted to have a bit of a conversation I thought might be a little bit more appropriate. We've got a lot of people here today talking specifically about Drupal and about opportunities in government, about all kinds of stuff. I wanted to talk about, I guess, a little bit bigger picture for a second. So my name's Pia Waugh. For those who don't know me, I've been around for a while. I've been involved in the IT sector in some way or other for about 15 years. I've been involved in open source for about 15 years, and and it's wonderful for me to see the community growing and expanding continually, and to now have so many people that I don't necessarily recognize immediately, which is a wonderful testament to the growth of our community. I thought what I'd do is start by saying I've had a reasonable amount of success in the last few years. I've been involved in a lot of Linux stuff. I've been involved in a lot of open source stuff. I've been involved in now doing open government stuff, doing open data stuff. I guess I wanted to start by saying that every success that I've had in terms of the instincts and the skills development, the understanding of community, the philosophical underpinnings, comes from the open source community. So I wanted to start with a thank you, actually, for being part of such an amazing and world-changing community. The open source community is genuinely and quite tactically, tangibly changing the world, and that's a very wonderful thing to see. So the first thing is we have made it, I think we can quite easily say. Open source has become normalized, it has become embedded. We're starting to see open source technologies and open source communities and open source people and leadership methodologies embedded into every aspect of life, which is very interesting. Yeah, right? Exactly. And it has been interesting because it's true. You know, at first they laughed at us, then they fought us, and now we've won. All the rest of it. So it's been a fascinating journey for me to watch, because 15 years ago it was a very different conversation. I remember starting in the IT sector. My background's sysadmin. I'm a programmer insofar as I can do all the scripting languages, which I guess to this community is okay. But you know, background in systems administration and systems design and architecture and implementation and very big projects back in the day. And I remember all my Unix friends saying, Pia, this Linux thing, you know, it'll blow over. You know, it's just a fad. This open source thing, you know, and it's been very, very interesting to see the sort of conversations I now have. In fact, most of those people who back then rallied so hard have got back in touch over the years and said, "Hey, I've built this new Linux company. You know, I bet you'll be proud." I'm like, "Go you." But what I'm seeing is that we've seen the normalization. We've seen, and it is largely because of the open source web tools that normalization has happened. There's a lot of challenges in big institutions and including government to engage with, I guess, some of the traditional systems and the traditional approaches. So what a lot of people are finding is they can go outside of their traditional IT department and get you know, great online tools very easily now, and a lot of that is underpinned by open source. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the lessons learned and some of the things that I'm seeing being adopted from open source culture into government, which I guess is where I work now and where I have a lot of fun getting up to mischief. So I'm going to talk about technical standards, I'm going to talk about community, and I'm going to talk a little bit about leadership and how these things play into how these things have become embedded into government and indeed to other places. So from a technical standards perspective, of course, we're seeing a bit of a quiet revolution in government at the moment, and it is fun to be involved in, and it is fascinating to observe. We're seeing a change in perspective coming about where, you know, and this is, I think, happening across the board, not just in government, but it's very noticeable in a very big organisation like government, where people are starting to realise that, you know, IT isn't just like electricity. You don't just switch it on. It's not just something that you pass on to someone else. You actually have to take it on strategically. You have to get your geeks into the strategy room. You have to get them into the policy room. You have to get them into the, you know, into the initial design about what it is you're trying to do, because, you know, the geeks, us geeks, are the best people placed to design something great, to design something that's implementable, and to actually help something be successful. So, so that quiet revolution is sort of happening, and from a technical standards perspective, the Unix perspective that we all come from, you know, rather than trying to have one ring to rule them all, we take lots of smaller parts of the pie that all do one task very, very well, and then put them together in a useful way. And that modular design approach, that modular approach to systems means that you can always move quickly, you can always switch out something if it doesn't, if something better comes along, you can always iteratively improve each individual bit. So modular development is another big thing that's starting to be recognised as important. I don't know if you've seen, but one of the things that's coming out soon will be a whole-of-government digital service standard and a whole-of-government digital design guide. Now, this is part of the e-government digital economy policy that came out last September, and and it's very much obviously borrowing from our friends in the UK, but to have a whole-of-government digital design guide that talks about agile and talks about modular design and talks about API-driven government and those kinds of things is very exciting, and it's going to be quite a game changer, I think, for government. From a technical stance, obviously, a lot of that draws from open source approaches. And so for a lot of that's intuitive. Why would you do it any other way? Well, turns out there's a lot of people out there that don't think the same way as us, but they're rapidly learning, which is good. So open standards, of course, has become a lot more understood and a lot more prioritized and a lot more important to governments over a number of years. And again, that's something embedded in how we do things. I think technical excellence is a real hallmark of our community from a technical perspective. People love to do something clever. We love to solve a problem that's particularly tricky, and we love to solve it in the most beautiful way possible, because code is poetry to us, and beautiful code and a beautiful hack is something that we appreciate. So actually having pride in our in the technical outcomes, not just in the final outcome or what color it is or what bloody font it's used, actually having pride, although for typophars, I apologise for that last comment, but having pride in something that is of technical excellence, that I think is a change. A lot of people have seen IT traditionally as you just give it to the people in the basement and they just build something, so long as it works we don't really care. But pride and technical excellence is a hallmark of our community, and something that's coming into government more and more. Peer review, obviously many eyes, make all bugs shallow. That kind of mentality and having that peer review across government, I think, is very new to a lot of people. But again, a very important technical practice, which helps make better code, better projects, better outcomes. And when you don't have a culture of peer review, you get silos. And of course, everyone knows about silos in government can be very, very difficult to climb over sometimes. But when you start to break down those silos and you start to get sharing of skills and comparative approaches, then you start to get better outcomes for everyone. And I guess the last one that, from a technical perspective, release early, release often. I mean, we invented Agile. We did Agile before it was cool. And we've been doing it for, effectively 30 years. And it's kind of nice now that it's being seen as this wonderful methodology that people need to go and get trained on. But our entire community have that instinct, because that's how we work, that's how we operate, that's how we've always operated, which puts us in a competitive advantage, which is wonderful. So let's move on to community. Some of the aspects of our community that are very powerful, that again are helping transform, I guess, the culture of governments and governments around the world, but also society more broadly, is we have a very do-it-yourself perspective. So for me, coming into working for government, I mean, I've only been in the federal government for almost 2 years, and I worked a little bit in state government before then, and prior to then I was just in the IT sector, and working in as an advisory role in a politician's office for a little while, but don't hold that against me. The idea that our community is very do-it-yourself, you come from the assumption that if you want to do something, you just do it, right? If you don't have the specific skills, you find the people with the skills and you do it together. What I found in government is a lot of people in larger institutions, whether they be government and sometimes even corporate as well, have a kind of a learned helplessness about technology, a learned helplessness about power. They tend to say, oh, I haven't been given permission, I need to seek permission, I need to ask someone, I need to be given a process, I need to, mitigate the risk for myself personally. Whereas our community is just like, well, just do it, just why wouldn't you just do it? Here's how you do it, I'll do it, And so this do-it-yourself culture is a community of very powerful people who transcend a lot of the traditional barriers to getting stuff done. you know, whether it's across cultural barriers, across language barriers, across disability, across gender, across, you know, all of these geopolitical barriers. You know, you see projects in the open source world where people come from every possible imaginable background and working together because you're actually focused on getting a good outcome. And when you have an outcomes-focused community of people, each of those individuals takes that perspective back into their workforce and back into their jobs and back into their, you know, non-open source communities and starts to make a difference because so many other people are not as outcomes focused as we are trained through this community to be. So it's a very powerful thing, and that cultural bleed, if you like, into other areas I think is very powerful. Collaboration, we collaborate and compete. We collaborate on what makes sense to collaborate on, then we compete on the stuff that's a difference to us. That tension, and it's a very healthy tension, I think also makes us very effective people and very powerful and in going out and actually transforming the different areas that we're involved in. Which sort of brings us to the concept of collaborative innovation, which is a stupid made-up term that I made up. But the concept is that, particularly in government, you know, people in government are not going to get a lot more money or people or resources to get things done. And yet when you ask people what's the biggest barrier to, you know, to innovating, and I know it's a dirty word, but bear with me, they say, oh, we don't have enough money, we don't have enough people, we don't have enough time. And I always say, well, who else in government, or indeed other jurisdictions, or indeed other governments, or indeed the private sector, or indeed citizens or NGOs are trying to do what you're trying to do? Why wouldn't you work with them? Why wouldn't you share resources? Why wouldn't you take a collaborative approach to solving the problem, which actually gets the problem solved in a better way for everybody? And it's mind-blowing how much of a leap that is for so many people because they've been taught to think in terms of silos. So getting great outcomes, and of course innovation means you actually have to do something, not sit in a room to create a strategy, to create a policy, to have a discussion. You know, so actually getting outcomes, again, is a very important part to that. So teaching that collaboration has been very useful, and getting that cross-disciplinary approach to solving problems. You know, if you want to solve problems for society today, you can't just stick within one discipline. You need to go across different areas. And again, our community is quite good at that. We have, of course, at the heart of everything we do, a very powerful ideology, the ideology of freedom. We have this ideology, we have this perspective that, and it's very, very true, people are exactly as free as the tools that they use, right? Now, we take that responsibility very seriously in a lot of cases, and we're very effective and world-changing people as a result. But when you take that to the next level and start realizing that the people around you are not as empowered as you because they don't have that technical literacy, they don't have that technical engagement, they don't even understand how not free they are because of some of the because of some of those barriers, then we're actually pioneers in this age, and we're actually leaders, and we're actually forging the future, you know, whether we're doing it intentionally or not. And so taking that responsibility very seriously, I think, is a very important thing. I certainly do. Anyway. Open source leaders are effectively, and you got to remember, all of us are leaders because of the nature of our community. We're effectively infiltrating and influencing every sector, and indeed the entire society, and it's a very exciting thing to see unfolding, particularly over the last, you know, open source has been around for 30 years, but particularly over the last sort of 10 years or so, it's really started to get out there, and it's been very interesting to see. We're also very good at building on the shoulders of giants. So, you know, looking at what came before, building on top of it, and actually improving upon what's come before rather than continually reinventing the wheel, which means that we actually run faster and stronger than a lot of our competitors, which is, again, why open source is doing so well in the market as well. An example, I guess, if just a quick one about community and teaching that difference is a little side project that I run in my copious spare time called GovHack, where we have a wonderful crew of volunteers all around Australia who help to run a national hackfest. You know, and we're really trying to reclaim and project what hacker culture is all about, which again is at the core of our community. And what we're seeing is that governments in particular love the idea. They don't quite get it until they do it. And then when they're there and they actually see the outcomes and they actually talk to developers and they actually get their data custodians talking to teams and seeing what can be done in 48 hours, you know, getting government people to get out of their silo and talk to other people and see what's possible when they engage in all the sort of ways which are natural to our community, that's when we're going to get really powerful changes and really powerful outcomes, which is what we're seeing. I guess one of the final things I wanted to go into was around leadership. as I said, all of us are leaders in some way because of the way that we're trained, because of the way that our community shapes us and the tools that we use shape us. But there's a particular type of leadership that emerges in an open source community, which is a very powerful thing, again, and that is this concept of a meritocracy. You know, meritocracy matters. Good code, good contributions matter. You are judged on the contributions that you make to our community, not on your, you know, the amount of money you have, or the contacts that you have, or the history that you have, or, you know, the colour car that you have. You are absolutely measured on the contributions you make, and those contributions might be social, they might be technical, they might be code, they might be, you know, great implementation, they might be all kinds of things, but you are judged on that. That's a real change. I quite often get up and talk about, you know, some of the big changes that I'm seeing in society, and one of those big changes is around that shift in power from institutions to individuals. You know, what used to be centralised and distributed from central points of control is now distributed to everyone. You know, the future is here, it is widely distributed, to paraphrase. And individuals are able to create, they're able to share, they're able to collaborate, they're able to disrupt, they're able to monitor for, you know, sideways and upwards, which is very powerful as well. And these things are changing the fabric of our entire society, which is very exciting. And so that meritocracy side of things is very important. You know, that concept that you are judged on your contributions rather than anything else drives people towards behaviours which is good for society, in my opinion. So, and of course, a lot of that comes back down to the power to fork. You know, if you don't like the project you're involved in, you can always fork it and create your own and go and create your own community. And so we have a Darwinism of communities. So communities that are successful and projects that are successful are the ones that don't just have the best code, don't just have great code, but ones that also forge a great community around them. Because if you treat your community badly, or if your community becomes toxic, it will fork and create a new community. And we've seen that happen over and over again, and it's a very, very healthy thing. So that power to fork also gives us an understanding that if someone's doing the wrong thing, we just go somewhere else. And that's cool, and that's good. And it means you don't get trapped into enabling toxic environments, which is again, something that's bleeding into places like government, where if I see something I don't like, I'll leave. The reason I've stayed there is, you know, I love working on what I'm working on. I love working for who I'm working for. I love the team that I work with, and I actually get to do great stuff. But I know that if I didn't like it, I'd leave. You know, and that's a very powerful thing. You see a lot of public servants get very freaked out about that concept because there's the idea that job security is more important. But that's not always the case, I think, when you know you've got somewhere else to go. Anyway, the power to fork is a very powerful ideology. And the leadership actually shapes each community as well. And that relationship between the leadership and the quality of a community is something that has really proven itself in many open source communities, including the Drupal one. So, I actually don't even remember how long I had to speak, so I'll make a last point. And the last point I had was, and I hope this doesn't offend anyone in the room, it probably will, but I'm getting good at being the bad cop, as it turns out. I think that one of the most interesting leaders throughout history, and this is partly because of where I'm going next week, is Genghis Khan. The reason Genghis Khan was so interesting, and I mean, yes, there was a lot of brutality involved as well, but let me come back to that. What he was interesting at was, regardless of the cultural context of the time, he prioritized loyalty and he prioritized service, like good services. He prioritized effectively, he created a meritocracy, which in that culture at that time was very unusual. Usually, you know, it was around blood relations, it was around who your friends were, it was around who, you know, how much power your family had. And by putting in place that meritocracy in the way that he went about things, he created a very effective and a very loyal and a very successful, I guess, campaign. And the other thing is that when he went into a place, he didn't just go in and say, you must adopt my ideology. You know, he had a very strong personality and a very strong perspective that he was the, you know, the emperor of everything, but effectively, or the god of everything to some degree. But he went in and said, you know, you have your religion, you have your perspective, you have your culture. Keep doing that, so long as you're just happy to be part of my empire, effectively. You know, resistance was futile. In his case, resistance was a bit more violent than resistance in the open source community. But that valuing of meritocracy and that valuing of respecting the fact that everyone's at a different point in their journey, but so long as there was something in common to bring people together, then that worked quite well. So I guess I'd like to argue to you, and this is the bit that might be offensive, that the open source community are kind of like the Mongols of the digital age. We're creating this world that pulls everyone together regardless of their difference, and we're doing it very, very effectively. So I guess I'll finish there, and I'll say a quick thank you, even though he's had to leave. But I do want to do a quick shout out to John Sheridan, my boss, who is a wonderful boss to work for, and I think that I would probably drive a few people in the public service a little bit more mad, but he's the sort of person that we need more of in the public service, who delegates down, who gives his people freedom to go and actually play and do cool stuff and experiment, and puts that responsibility downwards to help people achieve. And that's what we're starting to see as well. There is a real change in leadership happening in government, and it's not because there's a motivation for people to change, above and beyond the motivation, which is the people that are changing and the people that are taking on these approaches, which, completely coincidentally, of course, aligns with how we approach things, are actually succeeding. And success is the greatest path to actually sustaining change. So, finally, to thank you all again for being part of the community that has taught me so much and has led to so much of my success, and our combined success is just world-changing. So a huge thank you. Please continue to rock and to do awesome stuff, and let's continue to change the world for the better. Thank you very much. Any questions? Yo. Oh.
Forcing me to rewrite my slides.
Oh.
No, that's great. So the thing of most interest to me is the context of what I call the procurement industry.
Yep.
And initiatives that you're taking to start having them consider agile approaches to get out of this industry of fixed scope, fixed deliverables, 2-year spec process before we actually do anything. How are you approaching changing that?
Okay, so the question, I'm guessing I probably need to repeat the question if everyone didn't hear it, is around how we're approaching, actually integrating more agile approaches to how we do things in order to facilitate more agile approaches to procurement, yes? So partly it's by leading by example. So one of my day jobs, and it's only one, although it's the one most people know about now, is DrupalGov AU. So I run the open data program and policy for government. We have a small team within finance. We collaborate with a small team over at Department of Communications, and we've got an army now of, I guess, open data people across government that we're working very closely with, and taking a distributed community model, as you would expect me to do. So partly we're leading by example. With DrupalGov AU, we could have spent 2 years designing and creating a specification, and it never would have been perfect. And by the time you implement it, it would have already been out of date. So what we've done is led by example and said, we took what at the time was best practice, which we sort of looked around what was going on in different places and took the UK model, not just in terms of the technology they use, but in terms of the support model that they used. And it was a open source, open data platform on a LAMP stack. And we said, let's take an iterative approach. So over the last 12 months, we've been very much in startup mode. So we've only hit 13 months just now of DrupalGov AU being relaunched, right? So the startup mode was all around, what do our data custodians need? What do data users need? Let's really focus on good quality outcomes from a data perspective. Like, prettiness will come, but if you don't have the quality data behind it, then it won't work. So we took a very iterative approach, a very agile approach. All of the code that we developed for it is on GitHub. All of the, we put out monthly reports. We talk to our data custodians in particular, because trying to make it easy for them to publish data will then lead to good stuff for people who want to use data. We put in place processes that we then tested and then tweaked as we go. So we've taken a very iterative approach to our methodologies as well as our technology. And, and when someone came to us and said, we really want to publish our spatial data, but we don't have a way to publish it as a web service, we added a geo service, so we added a spatial service. So we've expanded the functionality very much in accordance to what's needed. and created the case study. Now, why that's useful to broader government is because we can then talk about that as an example of success. We've had a number of, and the same things happen with Australia Gov.eu, the same things happening with GovCMS, pretty much all the online services that we run within our division, and it's a reasonably large team of, there's sort of 250 people in our division, of which 30 or 40, I guess, in the online services delivery stuff. And so with all of our online services, we've taken this approach. And that then creates the example for other people in government. You can spend 3 years speccing something and 3 years implementing it, and over those 6 years, you probably could have actually set it up 6 times over in some cases. So, and it's not to say that that approach will work for everything, but trying to be a demonstrator of, as well as a supporter and proponent of Agile, not just in terms of tech, but taking into policy land as well, is the only way to really change that culture. And Agile policy is a fascinating idea, because you talk to so many policy people you talk to, and a policy can be anything from a couple of dot points on a handkerchief to a fully blown multi-kilogram document. So policy can be different things to different people. But whenever I talk to people in public service about, so how do you analyse and monitor and then iterate your policy? They say, oh yeah, we monitor it in the post-policy, assessment phase. I'm like, well, that's too late, surely. You want to be monitoring as you go, and you want to be tweaking as you go. If you take an agile approach to your policy, then even a bad policy becomes good policy very quickly, because it's based on the evidence of the success of the policy. And people's brains explode. It's really cool. So not just stopping at how this stuff applies to tech, but starting to look at how it applies to other things is where I think we're starting to make a difference. And you just got to be the change you want to see. So we're just being the change we want to see and winning by default.
And just a quick follow-up, is there any moves to have an agile policy in the same way that there's an open source policy?
Ha! Sort of. Sorry, is there any move to have an agile policy? The answer is yes, because, but there's not going to be an agile policy. There's the digital service standard, and if you want to have a look at roughly what that'll look like, have a look at the digital service standard of the government digital service in the UK. Just Google digital service standard and GDS, I guess. We actually have one that's in draft at the moment, and it specifically talks about agile. It talks about modular. It talks about, I get out there all the time, talk about government as an API, and the idea that if we provide all data and services, transaction systems through APIs, and if they need authentication, they need authentication. If not, they can be open. In the case of data, generally they can be open to read. In the case of transaction systems, you need authentication to interact with them. But if you make all of that available through an API, as this audience knows, you can start to aggregate and create cross-agency, cross-jurisdictional, cross-world. A lot of people in government say, oh, let's create a whole of government blah. But what they really mean is sometimes whole of department, which makes no sense because no one cares what their department name is. Sometimes they mean whole of jurisdiction. So you'll be like, oh, let's do a whole of government business portal, but what they're actually talking about is a whole of Commonwealth government business portal. So you still got to deal with the states, still got to deal with the locals. An API-driven approach to government means we can say, let's pull this service or data from this jurisdiction, these 4 departments, and actually create. I just want to know what health services are available in my area. I don't care which jurisdiction or which department run them. So that methodology is getting us closer and closer towards that kind of true citizen-centric service delivery, which of course creates competition at the service delivery level, which is also very, very good for our tech sector. Yo.
You talked a little bit about the siloing and how that goes completely against the open source idea. And it's funny, I'm interested to hear how you handle these situations, because I heard a story last night where there's 2 large government agencies that have similar data, and one agency wanted data, the other agency didn't provide it in a friendly way, so this agency scraped the HTML, ended up getting what they needed, and then the other agency said, you stole our data.
Yeah, right.
And when you hear those stories, you just feel a little bit like it's hopeless.
No, it's not hopeless. We're taking so many steps. The fact they even told you about that story is a good start. The first step to, solving a problem. Yeah.
How do you get a group of people that are so entrenched in this idea that, no, that's our data, you can't have it?
Yeah.
Even though it's on the website, so it's not stealing.
So
it's just coming from a small agile company, you hear those stories and you just think, how is this impossible?
the way, well, first of all, it's certainly not impossible. And the way that you make the change is by identifying all of the open or slightly open doors first. And you work with those. Because the closed door, In my experience, the closed door that say, no, we have a policy that says we don't do this. Okay, that's cool. I'm not even going to talk to you yet. No, I've sowed a couple of seeds. I'm going to leave that one. So then I go and talk to this door, talk to this door, talk to this door. You know, they start doing some really cool shit. And then this door goes, ooh, what are they doing? Oh, no, it's okay. You have a policy that says you don't want to do this. That's fine. Really cool stuff. What are they doing? starts to open. I've actually had situations where I won't say which agencies, and no, I won't even answer to a guess, but I've had a couple of agencies say, we have a policy that says we don't open data. I'm like, okay, cool. And then another business unit of that same department came to us and said, hey, we're really, really keen to publish this data. And we're like, yeah, cool, here's your login, here's how you do it, blah, blah, blah. And then after it's all public, we don't introduce them yet, right? So then we come back to people A and say, oh, just letting you know that, there's some people in your department that can help you with this. We're not saying, here's a problem. We're actually saying, if you've got a problem, we'll solve it. Sorry, I had to throw that in. I've been listening to a lot of bad 90s recently. But the trick is not to say, here's your problem. The trick is to say, here's your solution. This is a really important one. This is actually one of the things that my boss really drilled into my head, and it's very, very true. The best way to make change in government is to propose a solution, a real solution, right? We will never get 100% open data, but no one wants 100% open data, because 100% open data would mean your medical records and your Medicare records and your tax records and your criminal history, if you got one, and all those kinds of things. We need a balance between what can be made open, being made open, and what should be maintained private is maintained private. And that tension, by the way, will always be a natural tension. If there was no tension between what should be open and what shouldn't, there's probably something wrong in that society, yeah? So I actually think there's a natural good tension to go on there. But so the answer to that is, it's certainly not impossible. There's heaps of cool stuff going on. There's an appetite for change right now. Something like 70 to 80% of the senior executive service, the top tier of government in the Commonwealth government, are retiring in the next 3 to 4 years. So there's a whole change of perspective that's coming out now. And the other thing is just to demonstrate the success of what you do. So everything we do, we try to say, here's how it's gone, here's why it was beneficial. If it wasn't, here's why it wasn't beneficial and why maybe a different approach might be. You have to be very honest with these things. But the real shift that we've had with open data, and you've taken me into a different talk, you shouldn't have done that. The real shift we've had with open data is open data used to be seen as a retrospective, pain-in-the-butt compliance issue, right? Now, over the last 12 months in particular, we've said, okay, what are the benefits to government? Everyone understands there's benefits to the public, but if there's no benefit, if it's only a compliance issue for a department, then it's always going to be a struggle. So we looked at, are there any benefits to the agencies themselves in opening up data? And we found 3. We found major opportunities and benefits around efficiencies, major opportunities and benefits around service delivery, particularly in the public being able to actually deliver their own services in some cases on the top of government data, and innovation and all that kind of stuff. And the third one was around better policy outcomes. Quite often sharing unit record level data is very tricky, and quite rightfully so in a lot of cases. But sharing aggregate data that uses the same spatial boundaries means you can get comparative analysis across different data sets very easily and start to make better policy decisions. So those 3 things, agencies now want to open data because they see it to be in their best, to be in their best interest, and that's the real shift that we've had recently. So yeah, aligning motivations is the best way to have sustainable change. Really long answer, I apologise. Any other questions? How long was my session for? Hey! All right. Okay, cool. Well, any last question? We've got a 2-minute question. Yeah, shoot. Hello. Code. It's actually funny. So there actually is a precedent. There's 2 problems there. So the first problem about government releasing code, and is there a precedent for that? There is absolutely a precedent for government releasing code. There are a number of projects I could point you at immediately in a number of different agencies where they've either developed entirely internally and then published it, the source code, excuse me, as an open source project, or where they've actually contributed to open source projects, but they're not necessarily screamed from the rooftops. And indeed, the government open source policy says that agencies, should try and engage in the community. So, and people who are working in government who want to engage in the community should use that policy to tell their managers why they should be able to go and do it. Really, major change in government doesn't happen from the top down. It happens from the bottom up when you arm the peasants, so to speak. So, and we're all the peasants, right? So, using those policies to say, policy says we should be doing this, so, so we need to do it, we'll get a far better outcome than we think we should do this because, it's a good thing to do. So that's the first thing. Probably probably screaming out some of those precedents a bit louder would be useful, but it's very hard. It's very hard when there's so many things to talk about to get that word out. But I'll send some information through if you want. I'll tweet it if you like. Yeah. 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 Yeah, for sure. And this is where we get to a second problem. In fact, I'm going to briefly talk about two other problems. The second one is the disconnect between policy and practice, and it's a real problem, in my opinion. It is, if you don't have your practitioners, whether they're tech or whether they're frontline or whether whatever, feeding back into the policy, then the policy doesn't have a chance to adapt to the changing conditions and to improve over time. Again, getting back to iterative policy. So getting geeks involved in the policy development and in the policy implementation and into the policy feedback loop mechanisms would make for better policy. But that perspective and that culture is only just starting to shift in that direction as a concept. A lot of policy people are very holier than thou. We know best because we're a policy person, and we get to go to them and say, but it didn't work. Here's the measurements that says it doesn't work. Oh, no. Anyway, so that's a second problem. It's a big one. The third one, and this is another problem, is so I've worked in IT departments, so I understand exactly why this is the case, and I have a lot of sympathy for it. But IT departments have been in bunker down, lockdown mode for 20 years. We've been told to do more with less, more with less, more with less. And so we've got 20-year-old systems in some cases that can't be replaced because we can't get the funding to replace them. And so it's just, continuing the status quo. And so then an IT department will be asked for a quote for something and will come back with something astronomical in order to offset the underfunded other projects. But then, of course, now that the business units all can go elsewhere to get those same services, and they do, we've got a gap. We've got a divide between formal IT and, I guess, ghost IT, which is creating a problem. So I think we have a challenge within IT departments to actually adapt to the changed environment, but that's going to be a very tricky thing to adapt to, and it is a problem that I don't know what the answer is to solve it yet, but it is a problem, and it's something that needs to be recognised as a problem, because it's, on the one hand, you want to get the technical expertise engaged in the policy development, but on the other hand, when the policy people come and talk to the IT department specifically, they're known as the no people, and for a good reason, and for good reason on both sides, but it's not helping anyone. So I think there's a lot of cultural shift that needs to happen in IT departments for the amount of enemies that'll make me. Final? Yeah. And I've had that. I've spoken to entire rooms of just public servants. And I've given an entire speech about collaboration and how collaboration will help you get better outcomes and better policy and better projects and better delivery and rah, rah, rah. And then I've had someone at the back right corner, I'm going to pick on you, say to me, at the end of my entire speech about collaboration and self-empowerment and getting off your butt, he says, so what are you going to do to help me collaborate? And I just went, are you kidding? And I was actually incredulous. Are you kidding? It is not my job to help you collaborate. You go and determine who you need to talk to and go and talk to them. Oh, okay. So yeah, getting that sense of empowerment and do-it-yourself perspective into government, into everywhere, I think is very helpful. Okay, thank you very much for your time. I hope that was useful, and catch you at the rest of the conference. Bye.